They say a man spends his life building something from nothing, not for himself, but for the people he loves. Every early morning, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, it's all for one dream. To see your children live a better life than you did. I had that dream too, and for the longest time, I believed my son shared it with me. I was wrong. My name is Robert Hayes. I built my fortune from dust. No fancy degrees, no rich parents, just my own 2 hands, my grit, and an iron will that refused to break. I went from a small farm boy to the founder of a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. Every brick in my life was paid for with sacrifice, and through it all, I thought my son, Lucas, was my greatest achievement. He had my smile, my stubbornness, and for a while, my heart. I gave him the best education, the best chances, the best of me. But somewhere along the way, the world taught him that love was measured in dollars, and respect was only for the rich. Money can build houses, but it can also tear down homes. When I fell ill last year, my doctors said it could go either way. My health was fragile, my body weak, but my mind was as sharp as ever. Lucas visited often, not out of care, but curiosity. I could see it in his eyes. That calculating look. He wasn't counting my breaths out of concern. He was counting the days until my will was opened. I'd spend my whole life trusting him. But trust, I learned too late, is a dangerous investment, one that can ruin even the richest man. One night, I overheard him on the phone, his voice low but filled with excitement. "Once it's all finalized," he said, "I'll take over everything. $55 million? The old man's set it all up. He laughed. "Can't wait to finally do things my way." That laugh, it was like hearing my own heart crack in half. The real pain doesn't come when strangers betray you. It comes when your own blood sharpens the knife. He didn't know I was standing in the doorway, half hidden by the shadows. He didn't see the tears that slipped down my face, not from weakness, but from disbelief. The boy I raised, the man I built from my own dreams, had turned me into nothing more than an obstacle in his path. A few weeks later, I was released from the hospital. My strength had barely returned when Lucas showed up with a lawyer. He smiled, that cold, corporate smile I'd once been so proud of. "Dad," he said, "we need to discuss some papers. You'll be more comfortable somewhere else. Maybe a smaller house, quieter." I didn't understand what he meant, not until I saw the document. He had filed for full control of the estate, and the house I'd built with my own hands was no longer mine. It's strange, watching your child evict you from the home where you once rocked him to sleep. I wanted to fight it. Every instinct in me screamed to stand up, to rage, to demand justice. But as I looked at his face, the same face that once smiled up at me from a sandbox, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt a heavy, bitter silence. He believed he had won, that I was too weak, too old, too broken to fight back. And maybe, in that moment, I let him believe it. Because sometimes, letting someone think they've won is the first move in a much bigger game. He moved me out the next week. He packed my clothes, hired movers, and didn't even look back. I remember standing outside the gates of my own mansion, holding a single suitcase, watching my son laugh with his friends inside. They were celebrating, toasting to his new wealth, his freedom. He raised a glass and said, "To a new beginning." And they all cheered. But what Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, is that there wasn't just one will. There were two. He celebrated a fortune that was never truly his. And that night, as he laughed under my roof, I began writing the ending he'd never see coming. When I walked out of that mansion, the home I had built from bare soil and sleepless nights, it felt like I was leaving behind not just my wealth, but my history. Every brick held a memory, Every room echoed with laughter from better days. But the man who now lived there, my son, saw it all as just a property line. The first night after he threw me out, I slept in a small cabin on the edge of my old farmland. It was a place I hadn't visited in years. Electricity, no luxury, just silence and dust. But in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. When you lose everything, you finally see who you really are, and who they really were. I sat by the window, watching the lights of the mansion in the distance. It used to be my pride. Now, it was a symbol of betrayal. The wind carried faint laughter from the house, and I could almost hear Lucas's voice, proud, arrogant, celebrating what he thought was his victory. But he didn't know his father as well as he thought he did. My lawyer, a man I'd trusted for decades, was already at work. Lucas had the first will, the one that made him the sole heir, but he had no idea about the second one, tucked away safely, to be read only under specific conditions that his own greed had just met. This second will told a different story. It explained everything. The money I had set aside, the charities I intended to support, and the final, most important clause. It stated that if any heir attempted to seize my assets while I was alive or acted against my well-being, their inheritance would be nullified completely. I let Lucas enjoy his new kingdom for a few weeks. I wanted him to get comfortable, to truly believe he had gotten away with it. I watched from afar as he spent lavishly, throwing parties and making reckless business deals. He was a king without a crown, ruling an empire built on a lie. Then, the day came. My lawyer served him the notice. I can only imagine the look on his face when he read the words, when he realized the $55 million he was celebrating had vanished. The mansion, the cars, the entire estate, it was all gone, rerouted to the charities I had chosen. His inheritance was now exactly $1, a symbolic gesture of the value he had placed on our relationship. He called me, his voice a mix of rage and desperation. He shouted, he threatened, he begged, but all I could hear was the echo of his laughter from that night at the mansion. "You took everything from me," he screamed. "No, son," I replied quietly. "You gave it all away. In the end, it was never about the money. It was about a promise a father makes to his child, to teach them right from wrong, to show them the value of hard work, not just its rewards. I lost her son, but I found my peace, standing at her back on the farmland where it all began. I feel richer than ever, because I learned that true wealth isn't what you own, it's what you can't lose. Thank you for listening to my story. They say luck is for the unprepared. I say success is a fortress, built brick by brick with strategy and foresight. I didn't just build an empire. I built it to withstand storms, even the ones that brew within your own family. Every deal, every handshake, every late night poring over contracts, I always planned for the unexpected. Because deep down, I knew the oldest truth in the book. Money changes people. A wise man doesn't just build wealth, he builds defenses around it. Years ago, during one of those routine updates to my will, my lawyer, a shrewd man named Mr. Grant, proposed something unusual. "Robert," he'd said, his glasses perched on his nose, "have you ever considered a will number 2? He explained it was a contingency plan for those who understand that not every heir deserves what they're given. I remember laughing it off. The thought of needing it seemed absurd. My son, Lucas, he was my legacy. But some instinct, some quiet whisper in my gut, told me to agree. Now, staring out at the quiet, dark fields from the window of this small cabin, I'm eternally grateful I listened to that voice. Lucas thinks he has the key to my fortune. The truth is, he only has the key to the first lock. The second one is buried deep, waiting for my hand to turn it. But revenge is a dish best served cold. Rushing is for amateurs. So, the next few weeks were a study in simplicity. I lived quietly, tending to a small garden, its bounty just enough to sustain me. I read, filling the margins of old books with new thoughts. I wrote in my journal, the pages filling with ink and memories. My body, weakened by what Lucas had done, was frail. But my mind, my mind was a razor's edge, sharper than it had been in years. This quiet time was a gift. It was time to think, to plan, and to remember every sacrifice I had made for the boy who had become this man. I remembered the nights Lucas, small and full of wonder, would climb onto my lap and ask, "Daddy, when can I help you with work?" I saw him standing tall and proud at his college graduation, beaming in that expensive suit I'd paid for. The memory of his wedding day felt so clear, the warmth of his hug as he whispered, "I'll never forget what you did for me." Dad, promises. What are they worth when greed finds a crack to seep through? This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what he had become. A man who saw kindness as a weakness to be exploited and loyalty as leverage. Somewhere along the line, I had given him too much comfort, too much control, and far too much belief that everything in this world has a price tag. He was about to get a painful lesson. Some things respect, legacy, and karma can't be bought. My plan began to take shape. I started visiting old friends, former partners from my business days. Many were retired, enjoying the fruits of their labor, but a few still owed me favors. Big ones. Quietly, not with a bang but a whisper. I began to rebuild my network, not for fortune, but for information. I needed to know exactly what Lucas was doing with the empire I had built. The news traveled fast, and it was worse than I'd imagined. He was reckless, flashing his newfound wealth on luxury cars that lost value the second they left the lot, selling off prime properties in a panic, far below their market value, pouring money into high-risk projects he didn't have the first clue about. The media, of course, loved the narrative. They painted him as the prodigal son who inherited millions, a glamorous playboy living the dream. But behind those glossy headlines, I saw the cracks forming. I saw the beginning of his downfall. It's a funny thing about self-destruction. Sometimes, you don't need to push someone off a cliff. You just need to step back and let them run toward it. Then, the final straw. Through one of my most trusted associates, I learned Lucas was planning to sell my farmland, the very land where it all began, where I'd turned dirt and determination into my first real success. He was selling it to a foreign investment group that would likely tear it all down. That news hit me harder than the betrayal itself. That land wasn't just soil and crops. It was my story. It was the sweat on my brow and the calluses on my hands. It was the foundation of everything. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just about teaching a lesson. It was about reclamation. I arranged a secret meeting with Mr. Grant. When he saw me walk into his office, his jaw nearly hit his polished mahogany desk. Lucas had told him I was gravely ill, too sick to even leave my bed. We sat across from each other, the familiar smell of old paper and leather filling the space between us. It felt like coming home. "Robert," he said, his voice soft with a mix of shock and relief. "I had a feeling this day might come. I kept everything exactly as you requested. Primera agape. Hazlo determined." "No, it's time, Grant. Well, number 2 stays sealed for now. But we're going to make some adjustments." He raised an eyebrow, a spark of intrigue in his eyes. "Adjustments?" A small, cold smile touched my lips. "Yes. If my son wants to play games with his inheritance, he should at least know who wrote the rule book. For the next few hours, We worked. This wasn't a plan born of hate. It was poetic justice. I wanted Lucas to understand, in the clearest possible terms, that everything he valued, the money, the power, the status, was built on a foundation of integrity. A foundation he had casually done. We structured the secondary will with meticulous care. I established a charitable foundation in his late mother's name. It would receive the majority of my assets if, and this was the brilliant but if Lucas failed to meet certain moral clauses. He would be tested on his charity work, his business ethics, his investments in the community, the values he'd so carelessly thrown away. As I signed my name to those documents, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The sweetest revenge isn't about taking back what you've lost. It's about forcing them to learn what they never bothered to understand. When I left Grant's office, I walked out into the crisp evening air and looked up at the city skyline. The same towering buildings that had once seemed impossibly big to a farm boy with empty pockets. I thought about how far I had come, and how quickly my son had fallen without even realizing he was tumbling. My health was still fragile, but a new strength was flowing through me. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the quiet fire of a man who has absolutely nothing left to fear. I went back to my cabin, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a refuge. It was a command center. I started working again, not for money, but for meaning. I fixed the old wooden fence, planted a new row of crops, and gave the porch a fresh coat of paint. There was a profound peace in the simple, honest labor. Meanwhile, the empire Lucas had so eagerly seized began to crumble. Reports of his disastrous investments started making front-page news. Key business partners, smelling instability, pulled out one by one. The more he frantically tried to patch the holes, the faster the ship sank. And through it all, I remained a ghost. Silent, watching, waiting. They say patience is a virtue. I say it's a weapon, and mine was sharpened on the whetstone of betrayal. The final act was yet to come, and the stage was perfectly set. Months passed, and the calls started coming. First from reporters, then from bankers, then from Lucas himself. I didn't answer. I let the silence echo louder than any words could. He had taken my home, my fortune, my dignity, but now he was losing everything he had gained. And the best part, he didn't even know I was behind it. Every night as I sat on the porch watching the sunset over my land, I smiled. Because I knew the time was coming, the day he would come to me not as a rich man, but as a broken one. And when that day arrived, he'd realize something that would change everything. The $55 million inheritance he celebrated was never truly his. It began with whispers, soft at first, like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. Lucas and his companies are in trouble. One newspaper wrote, bad leadership, questionable deals, sudden staff resignations. At first, Lucas just laughed it off. He was still the golden boy of the business world, the man who had inherited a fortune and turned it into headlines. But behind the charm and expensive suits, the cracks were spreading faster than he could patch them. You see, pride always speaks louder than warning signs, right up until the silence becomes too expensive to ignore. He had thrown lavish parties to celebrate his success, toasted champagne to his new era, and told anyone who would listen that his father had been old-fashioned, that he would modernize everything. But money that's made without discipline, well, it burns quicker than dry straw. One by one, his business partners pulled out. His accountant vanished, moving to another firm. Investors started demanding answers. The entire empire he built on pure arrogance began to wobble under its own weight. And while Lucas was busy trying to fix his crumbling tower, I sat quietly in my small cabin, reading every headline like a morning devotion. Every fall has a rhythm, and his was right on beat. Now, I want to be clear. I didn't take joy in his suffering. Not exactly. It wasn't joy. It was justice. The slow, steady balance of life righting itself after years of being out of kilter. Revenge doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes, it just waits patiently for gravity to do its work. One evening, as the sky was glowing in those beautiful shades of dying gold, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a man I hadn't seen in years. Henry, my oldest friend and former business partner. He looked tired, worn out, like life had pushed him harder than it should have. "Robert," he said, gripping my hand tightly, "I heard what your boy did. I also heard you're planning something." I gave him a small smile. "Planning? No, Henry. I'm simply allowing the plan to reveal itself." He frowned. "You always did have a way with riddles." I poured him some tea, and we sat outside as the sun finally sank below the horizon. Henry told me how Lucas had approached him for a loan, and not for small change, but for millions. "He's desperate," Henry said quietly, "and he's arrogant enough to think everyone still fears your name." That night, long after Henry left, I stayed outside. The stars above looked sharper, colder, more distant than usual. I thought about how far Lucas had fallen, and how much further he still had to go before the lesson was truly complete. Sometimes, a son has to lose everything just to remember who taught him how to walk in the first place. The next morning, I went to visit Mr. Grant again, my lawyer. He'd already heard the rumors everyone in the legal world had. Lucas's companies were being investigated for fraud, mostly due to his reckless deals and falsified valuations. Mr. Grant looked at me over his glasses. "Robert, are you sure you want to keep silent? You could stop this before it gets any worse." I just shook my head. "No, Grant. He needs to walk through the fire. Only then will he understand what warmth truly means." We reviewed the second will, again the real one, the one Lucas didn't even know existed. Every single word was carefully written, every clause precise. According to that document, Lucas only had control over the first set of assets for 1 single year. If he violated even one condition: ethical conduct, preservation of company assets, charitable commitments, his inheritance would automatically transfer to the charitable foundation in his mother's name, and he had broken nearly every single condition. It was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. He celebrated his fortune, not realizing it was just a test he had failed from the very first toast. The months dragged on, and Lucas's empire officially collapsed. His businesses filed for bankruptcy, his mansion was put up for auction, and the luxury cars that once symbolized his success became silent ornaments in the driveway. But arrogance dies a very slow death. He didn't come to see me, not yet. He was too proud. Instead, he sent his lawyers, demanding access to all remaining estate accounts. I simply refused the meeting. Then came the emails, cold, short, transactional. "We need to discuss ownership. You're violating distribution clauses." I ignored every single one. And then, the first real crack. A voicemail from Lucas himself. His voice was strained, trembling with anger. "Dad," he said, "you've made your point. You hate me, but you can't undo the will. I've got everything in writing. You can't take it away from me. I replayed that message a dozen times. Each word felt heavier, sadder, not because of what he said, but because of who he had become. When a man's voice trembles with that much anger, it's rarely about hate. It's the sound of fear, pretending to be strength. Weeks passed, and winter arrived. The world turned white and still. I spent the cold nights in front of the fire, reading, reflecting, preparing. Then, one morning, a knock came at my cabin door. I opened it, and there he was. Lucas, my son. He looked nothing like the man who had once stood proudly in designer suits. His face was pale, his clothes were wrinkled, and his confidence was gone. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now flickered with shame. For a long moment, we said nothing. Just two men, a father and a son, standing between the past and the present. Finally, he spoke. I lost it all. Dada nodded slowly. I know. He swallowed hard. I thought you'd be happy. I sighed. Happiness isn't the word for it. Son, relief, maybe. He sat down at my small wooden table, looking around the modest cabin. You live here? Yes. He frowned. But you're worth millions, I interrupted softly. Was Lucas. Was worth millions. Now, I'm worth something far more valuable. He didn't understand, not yet. He was still searching for the man who could give him money, not wisdom. It's easy to look rich. It's harder to stay human. He told me everything. The failed deals, the lawsuits, the friends who disappeared the moment his fortune did. I listened quietly. No judgment. No pity. Just silence. Then he said something that pierced deeper than anything else. I just wanted to prove I could be better than you. That's when I realized the truth. It was never about greed. It was about pride. About a son who grew up in the shadow of a great man and mistook love for control. I looked at him gently. Lucas, being better than me doesn't mean having more money. It means having more heart. He lowered his head, his voice breaking. I ruined everything. I put a hand on his shoulder. Not everything. You still have time to rebuild. If you're willing to learn, he nodded slowly. But I wasn't done yet. The final lesson still waited, one that would break his arrogance completely. Not out of cruelty, but out of truth. I stood up and walked to the drawer where I kept my documents. I pulled out an envelope sealed, marked with gold ink, and handed it to him. I looked at it confused. What's this? Will number 2, I said quietly. He blinked. What do you mean? The real Will, Lucas. The one you never saw. He froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. The moment truth walks in, lies have nowhere left to hide. I didn't explain further. I just watched as he slowly opened the envelope. The paper trembled in his hands as he read the first line, then the second, then the clauses that followed. His breathing changed heavy, fast, uneven. By the time he reached the final paragraph, he looked up at me in disbelief. This can't be real, he whispered. It's real, I said softly. You celebrated $55 million. That wasn't truly yours. It was a test, one that measured not your wealth, but your worth. He stood up, his eyes wet, anger and shame colliding. You tricked me. I nodded slowly. No, son, I taught you. Some lessons are learned in classrooms. Others are learned in silence, when the walls you built with pride finally collapse around you. He dropped the papers and walked out into the snow, disappearing into the cold night. I didn't follow. Some journeys a man must take alone, but as I watched his shadow fade, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reckoning. Because tomorrow, the world would know that everything he thought he owned, every cent he flaunted, every title he claimed, was gone. And only then would he learn the meaning of true inheritance. The morning after Lucas walked out of my cabin, the world outside felt colder than usual. The sun hid behind clouds, and the air carried the kind of silence that only comes before a storm. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. Lucas had finally read the truth, but he hadn't yet faced its consequences. That was the cruel beauty of karma. It doesn't shout. It whispers. The truth doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps in slowly until it drowns every lie you have told. By noon, I received the first call. It was Mr. Grant, my lawyer. "Robert," he said, his voice tight. "It's happening. The media got wind of the second will. Someone leaked it." I smiled faintly, then let the truth speak for itself. Within hours, headlines began flooding the internet. Turner Air loses entire $55 million inheritance. Father outsmarts son with secret will. Cherry inherits millions after son's ethical breach. The story spread like wildfire. People who once toasted Lucas now whispered behind his back. The business world that had worshipped his success now mocked his arrogance. And through it all, I stayed silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply sat by my cabin window, watching the wind ripple across the fields. The same land he'd once called worthless. Sometimes, silence is the loudest form of revenge. Later that evening, I turned on the TV for the first time in months. There he was, my son, standing outside his mansion as reporters swarmed him. His face was pale, his expression hollow. Microphones pointed toward him, questions firing like bullets. "Is it true your father left a second will? Did you forge financial statements in your father's name? Do you regret evicting your father after his illness?" He tried to smile, tried to play it off, but his voice broke under the pressure. This isn't what it looks like," he said, his eyes darting nervously. I didn't know about the second will." The camera zoomed in on his trembling hands. The golden boy, the prodigal heir, reduced to a headline. And that's when I turned off the television. I didn't need to watch anymore, because in that moment, I realized my revenge was complete. You see, the sweetest victories are the ones no one hears, except the person who lost. But life, in its strange way, wasn't done writing the story. A week later, Lucas came to me again. This time, there was no anger, no pride, no denial. He looked like a man who had been emptied of everything. Money, ego, even excuses. "Dad," he said softly, standing at my door in the rain. "I don't know where else to go." I looked at him quietly, my heart torn between pity and pain. I motioned for him to come in. He sat at the same table as before, dripping wet, staring at the floor. "Everyone's gone," he said after a long silence. "The friends, the partners, the people I thought cared about me. They all disappeared overnight." I nodded slowly. "That's how it works, son. When money speaks, loyalty listens. But when money goes silent, so do they." He looked up, his voice trembling. "I was wrong, Dad. I thought money made a man powerful." "It doesn't," I said softly. "It only makes him louder. Character, that's what gives a man power. You see, when pride dies, wisdom finally has room to breathe. For a long time, he said nothing. He just sat there, letting my words settle like dust in the still air. Then, with shaking hands, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It was the article from the newspaper. The one about the will. He placed it on the table between us. "I don't blame you," he said finally. "You did what you had to do." I leaned back, studying him. For the first time in years, I didn't see the spoiled man who'd thrown me out. I saw my son. Broken, human, and finally honest. We talked late into the night. Not about business or money, but about memories. About his mother. About the farm. About the times we laughed instead of argued. He admitted that he'd been jealous of me, that every success of mine had made him feel smaller. "I wanted to prove I was strong," he whispered. "But all I proved was how weak I really was. It takes strength to build an empire, but it takes courage to admit you built it on sand." I didn't say much after that. I didn't need to. Sometimes, forgiveness speaks louder than any scolding ever could. When the night ended, I offered him the old guest bed in the back room. He hesitated, but eventually accepted. For the first time in years, my home had my son under its roof again. Not the millionaire. Not the heir. Just the boy who once followed me through the fields, asking questions about the world. Days turned into weeks. Lucas stayed, quietly helping around the cabin, fixing the porch, chopping firewood, planting a few crops. I could see the humility returning to him, piece by piece. Every morning, he'd leave the house early, walking through the mist-covered fields. Sometimes he'd stop at the old oak tree, the one where I decarved our initials when he was 10. He never said what he thought during those walks, but I knew. He was remembering who he used to be. Sometimes, a man must return to his roots to realize how high he was meant to grow. One afternoon, I received a letter from the foundation to one, now holding what used to be his inheritance. They wanted me to attend a ceremony, honoring the donation and establishing new community programs in his mother's name. I showed the letter to Lucas. He read it quietly, then said, "Can I come?" "Of course," I replied. At the ceremony, the crowd applauded the foundation's work. Scholarships, food drives, shelters. The money that once symbolized greed was now saving lives. And when Lucas saw that, I saw something shift inside him again. His eyes glistened not from shame this time, but from understanding. After the event, he turned to me and said, "She would have loved this, wouldn't she?" I smiled. "Yes. She would have been proud of both of us." He nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "I never understood what you were trying to teach me, Dad. But I do now." I put a hand on his shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted. Real revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about rebuilding what they destroyed inside themselves." In the weeks that followed, Lucas began volunteering at that same foundation. He used his knowledge that could profit to help young entrepreneurs, teaching them the value of patience, honesty, and hard work. He didn't talk about his fall. He didn't need to. People could see the humility in his eyes, the quiet gratitude in his actions. And as for me, I finally felt peace, the kind I hadn't felt in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd let go. Revenge can end a war, but forgiveness ends the story. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas and I sat outside the cabin together, watching the field sway in the soft wind. The same land that once divided us now brought us together. "E tornato mi," a faint smile on his lips. "Dad," he said, "do you ever regret what you did?" I looked at him for a moment, then shook my head. "No, son, because if I hadn't done it, you wouldn't be the man sitting here right now." He nodded slowly, then, "Thank you." The wind carried his words away into the fading light, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt my heart lighten. Not because I had taken revenge, but because I had found meaning in it. Some endings aren't about victory or defeat. They're about redemption and the courage to begin again. The years passed, quietly and gently, as if life itself wanted to heal what it once broke. Lucas stayed in town. The mansion he had once flaunted was long gone, sold to pay off debts and taxes. The world had moved on, but he stayed close to the cabin, to the earth, to the silence that taught him humility. Sometimes I'd watch him from the porch, leaves rolled up, fixing the fence, dirt on his hands, peace on his face. He no longer chased wealth. He no longer needed applause. He had finally found himself in the place he once rejected. The fold doesn't destroy a man. It reveals who he really is when no one's watching. I had grown older, slower. My hair had turned the color of the morning fog. My hands, once steady as stone, now trembled slightly when I poured my tea. But in those quiet mornings, as I watched my son rebuild his soul one act of kindness at a time, I realized something profound. The inheritance I left him wasn't the millions he celebrated. It was the lesson he learned after losing it. One evening, I found an envelope on my table. It was addressed to me in Lucas's handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note and a small photograph. The photo was of a group of young men and women standing in front of a new community center. The sign above the door read, "The Turner Foundation. Built on second chances." Below the photo, Lucas had written, "Dad, I used to think legacy meant money. You showed me it means people. Thank you for giving me a second chance at life." I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. My heart was heavy, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems the future. A few days later, I fell ill. Nothing sudden, just the quiet kind of sickness that comes for old men who have lived long enough to see every circle close. Lucas stayed by my side. He made soup, read to me, even laughed about the old days when I'd chase him through the fields for skipping chores. "Remember how you used to say, I'd never last a day doing real work?" he said one night, smiling. I chuckled softly. I was wrong. He lasted longer than I ever did. He laughed not the hollow laugh of the past, but one that came from somewhere deep and real. In those final weeks, our conversations were short, simple, and full of peace. We talked about his mother, about forgiveness, about what it means to leave something behind that truly matters. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I called him to my bedside. "Lucas," I said, my voice faint, "promise me one thing." He leaned forward. "Anything, Dad. Promise me. You'll never measure your worth by what you have, but by what you give." He nodded, eyes wet. "I promise." And that was enough. The richest men aren't the ones with full pockets, they're the ones with full hearts. A few nights later, as the rain whispered outside, I drifted off to sleep and never woke again. When they buried me beside his mother, Lucas stood alone by the grave, holding the same photograph that one of the foundation he'd built. He didn't cry loudly, he just let the rain hide his tears. But the world didn't stop for grief. It blossomed through it. Within months, the Turner Foundation became one of the most respected charity groups in the state. It offered education programs, business mentoring, and food drives for families in need. And at every event, Lucas never spoke of his lost millions. Instead, he'd tell people about his father, a man who taught him that true wealth lies not in inheritance, but in integrity. Some stories end in revenge. The better ones end in redemption. 1 year later, a journalist came to interview Lucas for a magazine article titled "From Fortune to Forgiveness." During the interview, she asked him, if you could go back and change one thing, what would it be? He smiled faintly. Nothing. Because every mistake led me back to where I should have been, all along beside my father's lessons. The interviewer tilted her head. And what did your father teach you? Lucas looked away for a moment, his eyes reflecting the same calm I once had. Then he said, he taught me that the true inheritance is not money. It's wisdom, love, and the strength to start over. The article went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was human. People saw in Lucas's story a reflection of themselves. The pride, the fall, the forgiveness. The message touched millions. The once disgraced heir became a symbol of humility and rebirth. Redemption is the only kind of success that can't be taken away. Years later, on the anniversary of my death, Lucas returned to the cabin. It had become a small museum of sorts, a place where locals visited to learn about the Turner Foundation's beginnings. He walked through the rooms slowly, touching the old furniture, the cracked photographs, the worn-out books. He stopped at the porch, where the wind still carried the scent of pine and soil. Then he looked up at the horizon, the same one we had watched together countless times, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." He placed a small plaque beside the cabin door. It read, "Here lived a man who taught that legacy isn't what you leave behind, but who you leave behind." And with it I walked Hawaii, not as the broken son, not as the millionaire heir, but as the man I always hoped he would become. Revenge fades. Lessons endure. The story of Lucas Turner became a legend in our small town. People told it to their children not as a story of punishment, but of Chung, because in the end, my revenge was never about destroying him. It was about rebuilding what greed had stolen his heart. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful revenge of all. Life has a strange way of settling its own debts. You don't always need to raise your voice, seek revenge, or destroy someone to prove your point. Sometimes, you just have to let truth do its quiet work. When I wrote that second will, I wasn't trying to ruin Lucas. I was trying to save him from himself. I knew that one day, when the weight of his choices came crashing down, the world wouldn't mock him. His own conscience would, and that's the kind of punishment no man can escape. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers sand. That whisper can echo for a lifetime. Lucas lost the fortune he had once flaunted, but he gained something far more valuable: humility. He learned what it meant to start over, to rebuild with his own hands, to value people over property. And I, in my final years, learned something too, that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final act of strength. I never told anyone what I'd done. I never gloated or bragged about how I had written 2 wills. The world saw it as a twist of fate. But I knew. And that secret gave me a profound sense of peace. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about seeing someone fall. It's about watching them rise again, this time as a better human being. The best revenge isn't payback. It's transformation. When my son, Lucas, built the Turner Foundation, I knew my story had finally come full circle. The farm that once grew wheat and corn had now grown something even greater: compassion. It was a beautiful, almost poetic outcome. Out of greed came generosity. Out of betrayal came understanding. And out of a deep, painful loss came a love that was stronger than ever before. In my final days, as I watched the sunset brush gold across the horizon, I felt no anger, no resentment, no regret. Only a quiet, unwavering peace. Because I had learned that a true legacy isn't measured in millions of dollars. It's measured in the lessons that outlive us, the values we instill in others, the positive change we inspire. When people speak of my story now, they don't focus on the money, or the mansion, or the intense legal drama that captured everyone's attention. They talk about a father who smiled when his own son betrayed him. Not because he was weak, but because he knew that time The ultimate truth teller would eventually reveal everything. Sometimes, the quiet smile of a betrayed man holds more power than all the wealth in the world. Lucas visits my grave every year. He doesn't bring flowers or extravagant gifts. He brings something far more valuable. Progress reports from the Foundation. He shows me pictures of the lives he's changed. Tells me stories of families who got a second chance because of his work. And every single time, he kneels down and whispers the same words. You were right, Dad. I finally understand. And I imagine, wherever I am, I smile once more. Not out of pride, but out of pure, unconditional love. Because in the end, my so-called revenge wasn't about making him pay for what he did. It was about helping him see what truly mattered. The irony is staggering when you think about it. He once celebrated an inheritance he thought was worth $55 million, consumed by greed and entitlement. But what truly made him rich, what gave his life meaning, was what he discovered only after losing it all. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that is the profound lesson that life wanted to teach both of us. That money fades, pride inevitably falls, but wisdom endures forever. It's the one thing that can't be taken from you. So, if you're listening to this story today, I want you to remember this. Don't measure your worth by what you own, but by what you build inside yourself and in others. Don't waste your life chasing validation from the outside world. Chase real, intrinsic value. Because when everything else disappears, and trust me, it will, your character is the only inheritance that truly matters. He celebrated his inheritance with greed, but in the end, it was his father's wisdom that became the richest legacy of all. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that makes you think. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, take care.